I just wanted to set it in the context of, you know, where we are and why this is so important. I'm sure most of you will be aware of this, but just to sort of very briefly cover it, you know, the scientific consensus is that we have between 10 and 20 years of our carbon budget left at current rates of consumption. And if we don't dramatically reduce our carbon emissions, then the likelihood of average global temperatures going up beyond 1.5 degrees becomes quite high. And as we know, I remember Brenda Boardman saying in 2004, I think, that 80% of our housing stock in the UK is going to be around in 2050. And it really has to be retrofitted, you know, dramatically as a priority. And that priority is really only starting to kick in now. It's a very tough thing to do. I got an email today that East Sussex might have up to 2 million to be distributed through the local authorities for more retrofit and with, you know, target of fuel poverty. But it's very hard for local authorities to handle cross-cutting issues like climate change and, you know, big scale retrofit, because very often they have multiple departments and these are cross-cutting issues that go through housing, planning, environmental health, you know, transport and neighborhood services. So putting these programs into action is difficult. If you want to go on to the next one, Kate. So I'm gonna show you my house now, which is a Georgian masonette in the town of Battle, and I'm gonna make a confession that my name is Richard and I have an E-rated property. Not only that, but if you look at my EPC, you'll see that it doesn't give me very much scope for changing that rating. And I think a lot of us in older properties are going to find ourselves in that situation. So one of the things that I want to stress before we start, and you can do this yourselves, is that it's going to become very important to measure, especially if you're making interventions, to measure how much energy you're using and what the outcome is of particular interventions. So Kate, if you want to go on to the next slide.
Sorry, Richard.
Don't worry. So yeah, and while we're doing this, you could also switch. So we've got a number of tools that you can download. We put the links into the chat box. So our friend Ian Smith, who's on this call, did put together this very basic but useful Excel spreadsheet in which you can input your electricity and gas usage, and it'll add it up and show you how much you're spending as a start of storing your data. I just wanted to, I mean, there's a lot of negative things said about EPCs, but it's the only method we have at the moment. And as far as I'm aware, other European countries don't have anything like it. They probably will have soon, and they may have a better version, but EPC is our starting point. And what I did just before this talk was to download and look at all the EPCs for Hastings, just to give you an idea of how one particular town rates. And I can't see the figure anymore, but there are 41,000. Yeah, okay, so you can all do this. It'll take about 2 minutes. And if you want to declare in the chat what your EPC rating is, then it'll give us an idea of where we all stand. So that's my postcode. You go into that website, you find the house. And there it is. It's out of date. It's an E. And if you scroll down, one thing that is interesting and important, I think, in an EPC is it tells you your square meterage, and you can't often find that unless you've got the original estate agents selling sheets. And if you keep going down, yeah, you'll see that, and then you'll see that this property has a rating of 6.5 tons a year of CO2. If I make some improvements, I can put that down to 6.4 tons, and the average is 6 tons. So it's not great. And then somewhere in there, there is there it is, an amount of in kilowatt hours per square meter. And so my property is 313 kilowatt hours per square meter, which is very high. If you go back to the slide. So for me, this is the starting point for what I can do, which is what I want Peter, Ken, and Catherine to help me with. I've shown the Hastings stats there because I thought it was quite interesting that there are only 11 A-rated properties in Hastings, and a lot of them are D or below. And we did some, that houses you saw with the thermal images, that's a street called Silchester Road, which is opposite our office. And it's something we want to do more of, is to lend out thermal imaging cameras. They're not always that accurate. I mean, this particular image, the temperature difference is not really high enough to show what we'd like to see, which is where all the heat is being lost. But you can see enough to see that one of those properties is either unoccupied or the families in there cannot afford to heat their property. And this is in the lowest 1% in the UK for mental and physical disability. So it's one of the most deprived areas in the country. And you know, but it's a useful way of showing you what you need to do with the property. Keep going to the next one, Kate. So yeah, now I wanted to just show you our carbon calculator and try and encourage you to use this or something else. I've just put up the carbon budget there, which is the Climate Change Committee's 5th carbon budget. They've actually published a 6th one, but I thought that graphic was interesting. It shows that our domestic carbon footprint, including transport and waste, accounts for 40% of UK emissions. So if you follow this link and you put in your postcode, and Kate, if you just click the second source of electricity there, click on the drop-down menu. Yeah, you'll see it offers you renewable electricity generated on site. So that's, in that case, you might have solar panels and you'd put that down. And then you look at the passenger cars. I happen to drive an EV, so I would change it to an EV. And then I put in the standard average domestic electricity consumption, which is 3,000 kilowatt hours. And then I put 12,000 kilowatt hours in the gas. And then let's put 1,000 miles in for travel. And then let's put with wood pellets, is that in kilos? Put in 1,000 kilos, unless it's in tons. Oh, tons, no, just put in 1. And then if you press submit, oh no, this is where you need to put in the size of the property. So what does that say? I'm struggling to read that actually. Yeah, so 3.3 tons of CO2. So that, which includes my transport, is very different from the 6.5 tons that the EPC showed up. And I mean, that's partly because they're not so much going on what the actual consumption is, but on what the space in the house, what heating is required to keep that house at a certain temperature, which is not necessarily the actual usage. So all this data comes from the other calculator, which is the National Energy Foundation one, which Ian Byrne very kindly let us use. The difference between ours and theirs is we send this report. I'm not sure theirs does. I think it's just an instant one. So it's a very rough carbon calculation, but it would send you a spreadsheet with the details, and start from that. And then you want to go on to the next slide. And then I don't know if you're interested in, knowing what your footprint is for other things like your shopping. This app was in Positive News last week, and I know a few people have already downloaded it. It seems very popular. You sign an open banking agreement with them, and they basically calculate the carbon footprint of all your purchases, and make judgments on whether you're buying ethical goods and from companies that pay the minimum wage. So I think that's a much more sophisticated and comprehensive carbon footprinting tool. So the thing we're trying to do as an organization is see this journey towards reducing our carbon as something more holistic than just being about energy. So we're starting to get involved in other projects now. We're working with Rother Council on a program funded by Statcraft and Joju to install EV chargers on all the council's car parks. That's got a way to go. We're looking at supporting a program to do a tree survey and tree strategy done by Treeconomics for the town of Bexhill, where the tree cover is only 12%, and the idea is to take it up over the next 20 years to 25%. And we're looking at other schemes around waste and potentially food growing. And I think we're trying to do that at the personal and at the sort of community level. So in my case, although my EPC tells me that I'm pretty much stuffed, I can't do a lot. What I can do is do other things. So I have switched to an electric vehicle, but actually I don't need a vehicle, so I just share one. What else have I done? Yes, I bought a French worm composter. And last year, none of my vegetable waste has gone into a black bag. It's been eaten by French worms, along with, I'll show you the link in a minute, along with both paper and cardboard that would otherwise go in the recycling bin, but makes compost. And I've signed up to having an allotment. So there are things you can do outside the house. If you happen to have an energy inefficient home, you don't have to feel guilty, though, obviously, I feel a little bit guilty. But there are ways that you can reduce your overall footprint. Now, if anybody's interested, this other website, which I think we put in the chat, is from Pilio. Pilio was a spin out from the Environmental Change Institute, and they mostly look at businesses and offer this online dashboard, which is, if you like, a logbook of your energy consumption, and any interventions you make, and it prints out reports. And they have sort of dabbled with using it as a domestic tool. And what we'd like to do is they've said, well, if you get 20 people into an online community, then we can do the same energy dashboard for them. And it would cost £400, which would be £20 per person. And that way we could set up our own site. If you wanted to give us your email address, then you would be able to access your own carbon footprint. You would also be able to look at others. We wouldn't use the full postcodes, so although it would be mapped, it wouldn't reveal that it was your property. And that way people can carry on this discussion about how we gradually, try and hit this net zero carbon target. Yeah, I was going to say that one of the things I've done here is get a very good and skilled craftsman to take out all of my sash windows and refit them and scarf in missing bits of timber. And this was where I ordered the products from. It's something that has made a huge difference. And they're still single glazed windows, and they're still not energy efficient, and they wouldn't raise my EPC rating. But by using these staff beadings with the brushes, the flat is less noisy, it's definitely warmer, and it's definitely less drafty. So that's one thing I think Peter is going to talk about. Keep going, Kate. And yeah, here are my French worm composters. And I wanted to say something, I think Peter's going to talk about this. I do have a wood burner that uses local wood from powder mill wood. There's a lot that's come into the press recently about how much in the way of particulate matter wood burners produce, certainly open fires produce, and that they're not, they're not healthy. So what I've done, and I think what others do, is open it as little as possible. And also, I've got one of those, you can see it on the slide there, a flow air quality monitor. And I think this is an issue that is going to become more and more important, is the monitoring and improving of air quality inside as much as outside. I'm on a very busy high street where parents of some children don't even want to walk down the high street. They take the back route in order to avoid the air pollution. So yeah, so what I wanted you to think about was, how are you going to measure your own current energy consumption? How are you going to measure it when you make changes? And I see someone is asking about the Green Homes Grant. If you can go online and find your EPC, you'll find that the government have updated the online program, and it gives you a link to all the grants available and to other energy saving apps that are really quite useful and can give you basic energy reports on your house. You fill in an online questionnaire. And I think, Kate, you were going to say, but oh yeah, sorry, there's one more app there. There's a local Sussex company that makes a water, what do they call it? A blade. Basically, it's a tiny little thing, which I have here, which you fit onto your tap, and it spreads the water out so you get the same feeling of pressure, but you're using significantly less water. So these things like water reduction, I mean, the South Downs produce this wonderful paleo water that's 10,000 years old and free of pathogens, and we pump it a long way and then flush it down our toilets. And similarly, the South Downs has had a 25-year study which shows that the topsoil has gone down from a depth of 4 meters to 15 centimeters. So if you plow, and people do still plow, you literally turn the South Downs white. It takes 1,000 years for a centimeter of soil to regenerate. So we need to not just think about energy, but think about saving, restoring the capital of the soil. So any compost we can generate and use, any water we can save, is going to be as important as reducing our carbon footprint. So we're going to move on to Ken now. Ken is a retired architect and a sustainable design nut.
Hi everyone. Yes, Kate's putting up some pictures here of the work I've done, but I firstly want to say a couple of things. Richard, there's an awful lot that you can do. Don't give up. There are things that you can do to your place. So
yeah, I know it's I'm waiting for redemption from you, Ken.
And it's nice to see so many familiar faces on here. It's great. I want firstly to make 5 points of principle, if I can, which are really important. The first is maintenance. You must maintain your building. If you have a damp or wet roof or head to your building, or damp or wet foot or feet to your building, it's no good trying to put in energy saving measures. You must have dry building fabric as a starting point, because dry building fabric is more energy efficient. It's important. Secondly, it's important to understand the difference between passive measures such as draft proofing and insulation against active measures such as air source heat pumps, photovoltaic panels, and so on. Thirdly, mass. Mass is very important in balancing out energy needs. So if you can possibly have massive types of energy store, or put more mass into your building, or you can put insulation on the outside of existing mass, then so much the better. Then there's, of course, and this applies very largely to Victorian buildings, you must maintain breathability of the building fabric, because all the time moisture is moving in and out of the walls depending on the varying internal and external conditions. So you must not put in plastic films or use things like plastic-based emulsion paints, or as so often people use things like snow sem external paints on the outside of single brickwork buildings or rendered buildings. Doesn't help at all. You must use breathable materials, vapor permeable materials. Lastly, if you're overwhelmed by the prospect of some of this, and some of it does get quite complicated, make a start, do something. Start with draft stripping, put in what, then next priority is probably loft insulation. If you haven't got enough, it's usually scope to put in more. Start there, first of all, before you move on to other things. And then I would tend to treat it on a room by room basis as you decorate, but we can come back to that. So now you've got some of the pictures here of what I'm doing. What I'm doing is an extreme makeover. I wouldn't suggest to anybody that they attempt to do this. It might drive you nuts. I've basically built a new house inside an old house, and it was a house that had all sorts of structural and damp problems. I've put a new floor on the top, and I've also extended at the back. My approach has been principally to have very high levels of insulation and to incorporate mass wherever possible. So I have new concrete walls inside the old brick walls. I have concrete floors. I have triple and quadruple glazing. I even have insulated foundations on the extension. You can't put them under a 3-story building. They're not strong enough just yet. So even insulated foundations. I have bottles filled with water as a heat store under the stairs. And last but not least, I've tried to get in a little bit of architecture. something that hopefully, and people do seem to react to this, have a little bit of wow factor when they come in. You can see straight through the building from front to back, through the porthole door in the front. And when you come in, you should be aware of light coming down right the way through from the roof, so into the core of the building. So a little bit of wow factor, hopefully, even in this very small building. So I'll attempt to carry this round now and show you, because I'm living in a workshop, as it were, still at the moment. So I'll try and show you some things. Can we switch to that?
Yeah, Ken, I've switched it over.
Okay, I'll stand still now. So this is what will be, this is the new extension and will be the living room eventually when it stops being a workshop. Here is a log burner on set very low. And so this is the hallway coming into the house, looking towards the front door. I'll go up to the first floor that is the most progressed, and I have LED lighting everywhere. Some of it is sensitive, it comes on as you walk past. So the first floor is about the most complete, and each floor has what I call a bedroom suite. So it has a bathroom on this floor, and above it, it has a shower room. And then there's a range of wardrobes as I walk through. And then there is my bedroom at the back, which is reasonably habitable. I can't take you up to the top floor really, because there's not much lighting up there, but we can maybe look up towards the skylight. I don't know how well we can see some of that. You may be able to see the Ventaxia heat and vent recovery unit up towards the skylight. And alongside that will sit the water tank, gathering water off the roof to flush the toilet at the top. So that's probably, let me put this down, that's probably less than 10 minutes. So I'm happy to answer lots of questions at the end.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay.
So is this me? Is this me, Kate?
Yeah, Catherine, it is you.
Okay, so hello everybody. Thank you very much for dropping in. This is my house. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of what I did to my house. You can see it's a terraced Victorian house. And when I bought it, it was in really bad condition. I knew it was in bad condition and I planned to do some work to it. It's quite a tale. I had to move out to do the work, and that was quite a long tale, which we won't go into this evening. But my aim was to create something really nice. And I'll just take you on a little view. This is really why I bought the house, was so that I could have this studio, which is where I teach. I teach something called the Feldenkrais method, and I teach personal training. And I can get about 6 or 8 people in here when we're not having a pandemic, and people can come round and do their classes with me. So if you want to do the slides, Kate, please. I did loads of work. I just want to show you, you know, we ripped things out. This was kind of the very rough budget. This is about what I think the house is worth now, about $350. And I bought it as a knockdown price because it was, well, in a really bad condition. But I was lucky. I had cash. I was a cash buyer, and this made it really easy for me to do. Would you like to move on, Kate? Yeah. So the floor that I'm sitting on, the one you can see here with the rugs on it, this is when we were making the floor. Here's it's birch face ply. I lost all the flooring on the ground floor because we couldn't really get it up. This is the difficulty with putting insulation under your ground floor. If you take your old floorboards up, you're going to lose some of them. You're not going to have them all. And then you've got a choice. Do you put new flooring down, or do you go and buy recycled floorboards? This is a big choice. But underneath this floor that you can see here, which is the birch face ply, is 100 mil Celotex underneath. The builder and I had a difference of opinion about putting it down. He said he'd done it, he hadn't. Then I sacked him, or he walked away. Which, you know, he still wanted to charge me though. So the next slide, please, Kate. This is the kitchen. I took out the chimney. So you can see the kind of level of ripping everything out, but we took out most of the lath and plaster at the back of the house. So it's an L-shaped house. So most of the back, all the laths and plasters came out, which meant I could put in insulation. So next one then, Kate. Here you are. This is the kind of stuff you're going to be buying if you're going to put wall insulation in. It comes in blocks like this, and then the builders put plasterboard all over it, and then they've skimmed it. This is the back bedroom. And the next one, Kate. There you go. You can see the detail there. So you can see where the insulation is. Now you can see the bricks on the outside. Then there's a gap. Then there's the jolly old insulation, the battens, and the plasterboard. Okay. Okay, so this is one of the major problems I had as soon as it went in, these new patio doors. You can see where the rain came in. And this was because the window fitter didn't do the job properly. I had to call in a real good friend, Ken, who came to my rescue and said, oh my goodness, we've got to fix this. And he helped me, and retrospectively we sorted it out, and et cetera, et cetera. And the next one, Kate. So the lessons I learned in doing this are these, and I just briefly put these down. Really planning the work that you're going to do. Know more or less what it is you want to end up with. I knew I wanted to have a house where I could have a studio where I could work. So it's my living, working space. And so that's what I did. But that does take a bit of time, and not everybody has that opportunity, I realize. Stick to your budget if you can. Be really careful about the contractors that you choose. I now have a long blacklist. If any of you want to know, I'm happy to share that with you. And just be very realistic about how long it's going to take you and how much it's going to cost you. Be harsh. Make contingency payments. You know, people, your surveyor or your architect will tell you that you have to build in contingency funds for anything that you do. I had to give up everything.
Catherine, I think your sound has frozen. Is everyone else?
Yeah, Catherine's frozen.
Okay. Oh, you're back. You're back, Catherine.
Okay. Okay, it was just, sorry. So I was just saying, don't pay the builders until they've done the work, or keep a retainer. So that's probably it. End of presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. So that brings us to our final presentation, which is Peter. I'll hand it over to you, Peter.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me, Kate?
Yeah. Yeah.
The way that I've structured my presentation is I'm going to give some ideas for some easy wins for people that live in older houses, and then show a couple of case studies. Can you, next slide, please? Yeah. So, and I've split it between insulation, heating, ventilation, and lighting. Having lived in Scandinavia for a while, I'm focused on the general quality of the built environment. So it's not just about being warm, it's about lighting and ventilation and so on. So insulation, some of these are fairly straightforward. You could hang curtains inside external doors, for example. As Ken mentioned earlier on, we want to be draft proofing where possible. Rehanging existing sashes versus replacement, that's a bit of a balancing act. it's often nice to keep existing sashes if you can. There's several local specialists who that I know in the area that do very good jobs. Secondary glazing, that is a big subject. I'm not a big fan, but it can be effective if it's correctly done. And there's some new lightweight insulation materials on the market, which tend to be quite expensive, but are interesting to have a look at. The ones that I have experience of from an industrial application is aerogel and Capron from a domestic application that I've used myself on a project in Hastings. Heating, air-to-air heat pumps. I've got one in my own house in the Old Town. I found it very effective. It heats the house quite well, not the top rooms. So it's the effectiveness of the heat pump tends to, if it's an air-to-air heat pump, mine's just blowing warm air into the room effectively. Depends a lot on the layout of the building. So if you've got an open plan building, it's more effective than if you've got lots of narrow stairs and small rooms going off at sharp angles. Something that I've come across in the last few years is a Norwegian product. It's a low voltage carbon polymer mat, which is very thin, and it's very easy to retrofit in existing houses. You can either put it directly over floorboards, or you can put as part of a new floor. When you put this down, you put it over a Capron sheeting, which is a proprietary material, which is either 3 or 6 millimeter thick. It has a small insulating property, but its main function is it reflects heat upwards, so it sits below the mat. You can actually use this under carpet or under rugs. Something else that I've been trialing recently is infrared panels, which can be either wall or ceiling mounted or freestanding. And they come in a number of different forms. I've trialed a 750 watt infrared panel in my small living room in the Old Town, and it gave a very pleasant heat. So I can recommend at least trialing one of those for your house. Ventilation, ensure that your windows open and close. I like to ventilate my house for 5 minutes or so every day to make sure that I get fresh air in there and reduce the moisture content. Trickle vents are also a good idea to install in windows. Quite easy to retrofit in existing windows. Anybody with any sort of DIY skills should be able to do that job themselves. And chimney balloons are quite a useful thing to get hold of. They're cheap. It's essentially just a plastic inflatable balloon which you stuff up your chimney in the winter to stop getting cold downdrafts. I've put some links in the presentation so that you can research these things yourself. In terms of lighting, particularly in older houses, I like to look to see if there's potential for additional windows in the structure to bring in additional natural lighting. Then of course, it's a matter of balancing the cost against the benefit. Glazed panels, sometimes called fan lights above doors, often improve cross lighting in buildings. There's some pictures at the end of this presentation which show this feature in an existing feature in a Victorian house. I've also put them into some flats that I've recently developed, and they've been very successful. They really bring a lot of light into the building. Next slide please, Kate. So this is a case study from my own house in the Old Town. It was in a bit of a state when I bought it, and the floors were under dimension, so I had bouncy floors. There was the roof was leaking, the ridge had sagged, there was damp, poorly insulated. You could see through the external wall at the back. So I decided to do a complete strip out and refurbishment. So it was insulated to standards in 2013-14 with Celotex and Rockwool. Interestingly, HBC didn't allow me to put insulation in the loft space at the time because they were scared I was going to use the loft as residential accommodation. Heating, I installed a Mitsubishi air-to-air heat pump based on my experience of that equipment from a house I had in Norway. And at the time, I got it supplied and installed for £1,300, including VAT, in 2014. It's very efficient. It just sits in the corner of the room here, humming away. And my heating bills are pretty good. IR panels I've talked about. Again, I've left some links in here that people can research later. I also put a couple of Swedish wood burners into the house, mainly for the effect rather than the heat, although they do kick out quite a lot of heat. They burn at quite high temperatures, so there are more efficient models on the market now, 7 or 8 years on, but they are still pretty good. I point out it's very important to use correctly seasoned wood, and don't listen to what your log supplier tells you. Because people have delivered me logs which have been very damp and they're supposed to have been seasoned. So if you can, buy your logs 12 months before you're going to use them and season them properly. Be careful what you burn. And then be aware that there are some stricter regulations coming in shortly about wood burners. So before you install anything, make sure it's going to be compliant with new requirements. I've also got a stove-mounted convection fan on one of the wood burners, which I can show a picture of at the end of the presentation, which helps us distribute the heat around the room. Ventilation, I put new softwood windows in, external doors, trickle vents in all the windows. The wood burners draw air in from outside, so they don't draw air in, combustion air in from the room, which is a good tip. Lighting. Yes, I removed a portion of internal stud walling in the house and put in a glass block wall, which is a really nice feature, but it also brings light into a dark corridor from the bathroom, which I've also got a picture of that later on. And I'm gradually going around replacing old light bulbs with LEDs as they fail in the house. Can I have the next slide, please, Kate? Could I have the next slide, please, Kate?
Sorry, I am trying, and for some
Okay.
reason it's not going on.
Okay. Well, here we go. The next case study is some flats that I have developed in Hastings from a derelict building on Castle Hill Road. And I put a solar scheme on the roof, which is rated at about 4.5 kilowatts maximum. I was up there the other day and I saw that 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it had generated 11.5 kilowatts that day. So I know the bills in that flat are very low. The people who have are in there at the moment are using about £35 a month on all their power costs. There's no gas in the building, it's all electric. Yeah, basically everything was new in the building, new windows, new doors, current spec insulation for thermal insulation and acoustic. I've used this low voltage underfloor heating that I talked about earlier, these carbon polymer mats on Capron in the building. They've been very effective. It gives a really nice feeling in the building. And it's very economical as well. You can use it with engineered wood floor, but not with laminate. Or you can use it with tiling or with carpet or just with rugs. So it's very versatile. Ventilation again. I put in new windows, additional windows where there were no windows before, trickle vents, lighting. I've put in additional fan lights above internal doors and LED lighting throughout the building. Do you want to go on to the next slides? Okay. This is the air-to-air heat pump in my house in the Old Town. It's in two sections. So this section inside the room is the fan, and that contains filters for dust and pollen and actually some household smells. So the kitchen, which is on the same level, if I'm cooking something in there which is producing some smells, within a couple of hours, the filters have cleaned it out. If you go to the next slide, please, Kate. So that is on the other side of the wall is the motor. In this position, it's in the light well outside the front of my house. So it's very unobtrusive. It's extremely robust. The only thing I've got to do is throw a bucket of water over it every couple of years to get all the cobwebs and dust off it. It's really, that was a very good investment. Next slide, please, Kate. This is the one of the stoves I have in the house. It's a Contura Swedish stove, 5 kilowatts. I've allowed a bit of space around it, so it's good air circulation. Again, the combustion air is brought in from outside the building, so it's not drawn from in the room, so it doesn't deplete the oxygen within the room. And you'll see on top of it, there's that little fan thing, which is just driven by the heat of the stove. So when the heat reaches a certain level, the blades start to turn around and it pushes heat out into the room. So that's, if you've got room on top of your stove, I'd definitely recommend one of those. Next slide, please, Kate. So here is a fan light over, in this case, a bathroom door in my house in the Old Town. And it's, as you can see, it gives a really nice light. So that's what's actually inspired me to put fan lights in the development of these flats on Castle Hill Road. And it's very effective. Next slide, please, Kate. And this is a similar thing. This is in the same wall where the door was that you've just seen. And this is a stolen light, a so-called stolen light. And it's a hole that a new penetration I put in an existing stud partition, and I put in coloured glass blocks. And so I get light from the bathroom, and the bathroom has got a lot of external windows, so there's a lot of light in the bathroom. And that takes light through into this, what would otherwise be a very dark passageway. Next slide, is that the last slide? Okay. Oh yeah. Also, just something about lighting. I put in the bathroom, instead of having blinds or curtains, I put a translucent film on the lower sash, so I get privacy at the same time as maintaining natural lighting. And there are some trickle vents in the bathroom. You see at the top of the windows there. So they're very easy to retrofit in the house. You just need a router and a screwdriver and chisel, basically. I think that's everything, Kate.
Thank you. That was brilliant. That's so interesting. So that does bring us to the end of the presentations and to the Q&A session. And so I know there's been lots going on in the chat, so I'll come to that. But I do first of all have a question that was submitted beforehand. I've got a couple actually. So I wondered if Tom Sadler, if you could take yourself off mute and ask your question. Tom, are you there? Okay, maybe not.
I'm probably off mute now, hopefully.
Oh, there we are. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so the question I had was around internal wall insulation or older properties, especially ones that have thicker walls. The question was really about, well, I'm at a starting point of not knowing very much and what would be good products to use, especially ones that would promote breathability of the structure.
Can I remind the panel to take yourself off mute when you answer this? Ken, did you want to start?
Well, where do I start? Yeah. Not a straightforward thing to answer, because you really, although people are using Celotex internally to some solid walls, Peter is and Catherine is, you should really do a vapor permeability calculation to make sure you're not getting water gathering in the wall and forming condensation inside the wall. If you do that, you may be okay, but it depends on different external weather conditions. So internally, really, you should be using natural and breathable materials such as wood fiber. Now, if you want to get really good U values on your walls, that means they will be, these natural products will be probably at least twice as thick as the more artificial foamed insulants. The alternative is to create a cavity, is to build a frame internally and create a cavity against the existing wall so that any water that comes through can run down, provided you can find a way out for it at the bottom. That is a difficulty. So you need to do some calculations, and you're either going to have to ask an expert, or you can go online. You can find these things now on YouTube and the like, how to do these calculations. Depends on your specific wall, what the material is made of, how breathable it is, and so on.
Thanks, Ken. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add. Peter?
Yeah. In the flat that I was talking about on Castle Hill Road, the bottom of the basement of the building is very thick masonry, and we've done a tanking system on there which drains in the back behind the insulation, and it drains with gravity to a sump which is connected to the main drainage out of the building. The upper floors are timber framing, so it's ventilated from the other side. So I discussed this point with the architect, and he found that he said that construction was okay in terms of breathability, but I take the point of using Celotex against the masonry wall. I think it could be a bit problematic.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, any more thoughts on the panel, or should we move on?
Well, the point is you have to look at each specific case. There's not a general solution. I can advise further if someone wants to contact me on their particular. Yeah.
Thanks, Ken. That's a great offer. Okay, so the next question we had submitted in advance is from Patrick Manuel. Patrick, if you're on the Zoom, do you want to come off mute and ask the question?
Yeah, I have come off mute.
Great.
Yeah, I'm having heard the seminar. I'm not sure this question is probably a bit open, but I think what seems to me to be going to happen is that a lot of people are going to become interested in air source heat pumps because the government is pushing them very heavily, and they're in the news a great deal. And I think there's an interesting issue about, particularly in Victorian houses, to what extent they should be insulated before you start trying to put an air source heat pump in. And I'm thinking of air source heat pumps running central heating systems, because that seems to be the way that people might think of them. I know Peter's example was a bit different, which is more like an air conditioning unit. So I think there's a bit of a question here, because what they produce, and they produce water at a lower temperature, so it means you need much bigger radiators. So if you don't do anything to insulate the house, you are going to be having enormous radiators everywhere, or you've got to put in, another way to tackle it would be to put in underfloor heating. But I think because people's boilers are going to fail, it's going to be something people will be wondering about. So I just wondered what the panel, what their thoughts are about that. Thanks very much.
Ken, you keen?
Let me say again, the first thing is to make sure your building is dry, head and feet first. Next priority is insulation and draft proofing. No point in putting in all this fancy tech if you don't get some money put into insulation. I have an air source heat pump up on the roof, and yes, it supplies lovely hot water, nice showers and underfloor heating. But I've made a lot of changes to this. So yes, people will go for air source heat pumps. My installation cost about £10,000, completely new. But yes, you must get in insulation. There's no point in doing it otherwise. You don't want huge radiators. You want smaller radiators or no radiators.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's just that some people don't seem to have taken that message on board.
Yeah. Yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. I want to invite Ian Smith, if he's still to unmute, because I think this is an issue, and it links with a question from Guy as to whether we should be looking at hydrogen boilers as replacements for gas boilers. So a lot of people are thinking, well, my gas boiler's 8-10 years old. What am I going to do? What am I going to spend my money on? And if I do get one of these green home grants, you know, am I going to use it for a different heating system, or am I going to use it for insulation? And I think it is a really tough choice. And yeah, Ken is right. If you've got a drafty Victorian or Georgian property, there's not a lot of point putting an air source heat pump in, or your electricity bills are going to be extremely high. And as for hydrogen boilers, well, the latest generation of gas boilers, as I understand it, can be adjusted to take hydrogen, but hydrogen has a number of issues, one of which is it's not low carbon, at least not yet, you know, unless you use a lot of spare wind capacity to generate hydrogen at night or something. So yeah, but Ian, are you there? Do you want to?
Yeah, I can comment. I think the point that Ken makes about sort out the insulation first before you sort out the source of heat is actually crucial. On heat pumps, if I recollect, if you're still chasing RHI, renewable heat incentive payments, air-to-air ones don't attract that. So I think you do need to connect to a wet system to get the payment. On hydrogen, I think the jury's out on the cost of green or blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is where you use a fossil resource, but you sequester the carbon that's caused when you create the hydrogen. So it doesn't add to carbon in the atmosphere. Green hydrogen is where you simply use a renewable resource like a wind turbine to make the hydrogen. The problem with this, it's early days to know the economics of hydrogen. obviously the gas industry is desperate to maintain its business in terms of boilers and also the gas network. But if you do the math, very quickly, I think the gas network can probably only carry us quarter of the energy capacity if it's hydrogen rather than methane in it. That isn't out of the question, because some demand will switch to heat pumps that used to use gas, and if people insulate houses, you could get the demand down by that much. The other problem, which I haven't heard anyone talk about, is whilst the distribution network is plastic, the high pressure distribution transmission network is metal, steel, and hydrogen embrittles steel. And I don't know what the issues are around that. So there may be quite a few technical challenges in putting hydrogen through the steel pipe network. So it's early days to make decisions on hydrogen. The economics just aren't certain enough.
Peter?
I'm absolutely not a fan of gas in buildings. It is a nightmare.
Yeah.
A fire, explosion, emissions, you know, just get it out. Honestly, it's just, you know, go all electric if you possibly can. That would be my advice.
Can I just add another thing about hydrogen? Obviously, one model is not to use boilers, but to use fuel cells. I ship the hydrogen to the house and have it generate heat and electricity. The problem about using even green or blue hydrogen going to a boiler is it will still produce nitrous oxides, which is the greenhouse gas. So even if the sourcing is green, there will still be a climate contribution.
Guy, I know you asked a question about this, Guy Dartnell. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to come back on.
Yes, the reason why I put that question is I was thinking of getting a new gas boiler installed, and I thought, well, this is going to become defunct in time, and so I asked my plumber who was going to put it in whether an electric, there was some sort of an electric alternative, and I know there'd been a lot of publicity about you know, water being heated by taking heat from under the ground and things like this and stuff. And he said basically in terms of Victorian buildings, the notion of everybody, you know, drilling a sump down into the ground is kind of impractical. And his view was that essentially as time goes on, the one option might be that if you had gas boilers and you didn't want to get rid of them, or you couldn't afford to get rid of them, as they might eventually be able to be converted into hydrogen boilers. So that's where the question came from.
There are hydrogen ready boilers on the market now, I believe, and they will need an adaptation, a change in control firmware and the jets for the burners. So they, you know, they won't be. There are no boilers capable of burning hydrogen today without some visit. But essentially, I believe manufacturers are now producing hydrogen-ready boilers.
Peter, are you going to add something?
Yeah, plumbers are not good independent advisors when it comes to whether you should use gas or electricity.
Yeah.
Putting together gas pipes and, you know, but gas boilers, it's great business for them, and they're terrified of the demise of gas. So, you know, take any advice that a plumber gives you with a pinch of salt on that.
Catherine, we had a question about your experience of using Celotex for insulation, and whether you've had any damp problems and what your view is on that.
I just tried to send a message back to Tom. I mean, it's a slightly different case because mine's a Victorian house with 9-inch brick walls. So what we did was we took out the lath and plaster, which eventually it just falls apart if you start taking bits of it out. So then we built basically an internal wall at the back of the house with the Celotex in it with battens, and then the plasterboard goes on. So there's a gap between the brick and I'm assuming that it's all okay. I haven't had any damp problems. I do have on the ground floor, I have you know, under the floor vents, and so that does introduce some air between these two layers, if you like, if you see what I mean. And there's some interruption where you get to the floor joist, but some of the air does get through. And then I think in theory, I'm not sure about this, but they should ventilate from the roof space, from the loft space as well. So there should be a gap there too. So I think it's all breathing. I think it's all working. Yeah. And my house is, although it's not a passive house, it's very low. I have very low bills. I pay about £30 a month for my gas and electricity, but I'm quite mean with the heating because I don't need it a lot. But it stays quite warm and it stays very cool in the summer as well, which is a huge benefit, especially when we've had really boiling hot days.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, that's good.
Kate, can I just stay on that subject? I see, I don't know if Neil wants to unmute himself. So he's raised a question about cavity wall insulation. Now, I know we're talking about older properties, but unusually, I think that Hastings, for some reason, in the late Victorian period, was one of the towns where the builders built with a small cavity of about 4 centimeters. So quite a lot of the older properties do have cavity walls. And I think Neil is suggesting that the polystyrene beads avoid the problem of water condensation. And I know when we advise people, there seems to be this fear of cavity wall insulation, especially if you're close to the coast and you're getting wet southwesterly winds, filling up all those little holes where the mortar may not quite cover the gap, and it's into your walls, and there's interstitial condensation, and you're going to get damp and mold on your inside walls. So I think it's complicated. Does anyone want to tackle that? Let me just see if Neil wants to unmute.
Hey, Richard, thank you. Yeah, I suppose just give a bit more background. I mean, we're at kind of early planning stages with retrofit works and warmer Sussex, but the idea is that we use the existing, like you say, relatively small cavity, which is at the moment filled with foam, but that's failed. So they're going to suck that out and then fill it with, I thought it was silicone beads, but I'm not sure if that's even a thing. I might have got that wrong. But yeah, that's what, either that or polystyrene beads. Yeah, and then the idea is that if any condensation does get in there, or any water gets through the brick, then that just drips down and goes underneath the damp course. But in terms of then mold and condensation and that kind of stuff, I'm going to have a demand controlled ventilation system as well. So in the wet rooms, it's basically a fan that lives up in the loft space, and in the wet rooms, it then it's constantly monitoring what the levels of things like CO2 and oxygen and humidity and that kind of stuff, and it either blows in or sucks out air, I think. And then there are wall units which operate in a kind of similar thing. They're not electronic. They work with a kind of opening and shutting of some kind of special material that they've manufactured, and when that gets to a certain dampness, it opens, or contracts, or the opposite, and then lets in and out air. So yeah, that's what we're going to do to, I suppose, to make sure that we don't get that damp and condensation, is to have that demand controlled ventilation system throughout the whole house. So that there'll be a unit in every. There'll be kitchen, and both the bathrooms will be sort of will be linked up to this fan, and then every room will have a wall unit as well.
Sounds great. Catherine, do you want to comment about?
Yeah. I've been doing this sort of thing for about 25, 30 years now, and it amazes me how many properties you can go to where people just talk to, as been mentioned, to talk to a plumber or somebody, and they give you the advice that they, very limited advice they know. And the other thing you see is that people always do the insides of their houses first. I've seen some fabulous tiled bathrooms put onto damp brick walls, and then people wonder why all the tiles are falling off. So I don't know what Neil's walls are made of, But some of those little technical solutions sound, and the cavity filling sounds decidedly iffy to me, I have to say. I don't know, I'd need to know more about your building, Neil.
I'd just like to add that you should listen to Ken, because Ken knows all these things.
I don't know all of them, but
no, he came to my rescue. I would rely on Ken and get his advice before you go charging him.
I'll put my email here, and Neil or anyone that wants to contact one of the panel members can email me, and I'll link you.
And can I just say, in the late Victorian period, there were all sorts of experimentations with different types of cavity. So, you know, to fill them with, especially in Hastings, if you're in an exposed area, to fill them with polystyrene beads, which are probably have got PVA in them as well. It's been so many failures using that material because it doesn't all join up, so it can't form a complete barrier. So there have been hundreds of these that have had to be taken out again. You're having something taken out, I understand. I mean, if you think there's an uncertain cavity there, I wouldn't attempt to put anything in it, quite honestly.
Okay, well, maybe something to email about and get a few more details about. That's brilliant. Malcolm has just sent a message. Malcolm, did you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Okay, thanks, Kate. Yeah, just two quick questions. This thing about future of gas boilers we've got, I mean, I think there's going to be none from about 2025, but surely if locally generated biogas methane could be distributed, but people continue to use boilers on that, never mind the fact they've got emissions. But then has anyone done any work on a partial refit for passive house on a terrace house? So at least we can try and inch it forward on that. So sorry, two questions in one there.
Richard?
Well, I'm just wondering, Malcolm, Ian and I spent a few years trying to develop a community-owned biogas plant in and around Hastings, and we never got close to following the German model, which had biogas plants everywhere. And they were generating electricity and often using energy crops, so it wasn't particularly environmentally friendly. But you know, there is still an appetite for producing biomethane, but as far as I'm aware, there's not very much. So are you talking about how much, you know, and where do you think it's coming from? And are you talking about the so-called green gas that companies are now accrediting, like Ecotricity, you know, perhaps coming from Holland?
And you've got all this thing about food waste, haven't you, and other sorts of wastes being generating electric in great big plants. Well, I was just thinking about, well, the fact that we've got a lot of gas infrastructure, like you gentlemen said earlier on, and we're worrying about steel pipes and bloody hydrogen and all that sort of thing. Well, surely there must be something people could try and do locally to generate their own gas from, you know, a renewable gas, if you like, from waste, and then just pump that around the place using the piping infrastructure.
Can I comment? I suspect there isn't enough putrescible waste to serve the demand, and certainly the economics are not going to look particularly great. And the problem,
there is that problem, yeah.
If you go down that route, you end up doing what's happened with biofuels. People then start growing carbohydrate crops to feed the digesters producing the gas. And I don't think that's a good use of arable land. So yes, in micro sense, it is a solution, but as a macro one, given the gas demands, I don't think it's going to be feasible.
So that's all going to have to go eventually then, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. We've had a question from Marilyn, basically saying, if you don't ask a plumber, who do you ask? And Marilyn is based in the Midlands, but I think this is a good question generally, because we obviously all go to the tradesperson that we link with, you know, heating, you ask a plumber. But I don't know if you've got any advice for who you turn to when you're trying to do a retrofit.
Well, I would ask, my starting point would be ask an architect, and also ask a mechanical engineer, probably. ask somebody who knows what they're talking about. And I certainly wouldn't ask a plumber if it was a good idea to put gas into a building, because he's going to say yes. You know, and if you, it's like, you know, if you ask an electrician, should I put an electric boiler in? He'd probably say, yeah, it's a good idea. And it might be, but you know, he's biased. Plumbers are biased towards gas, and electricians are biased towards electricity. You have to form your own opinion based on expert advice, depending on the circumstances.
Mm. The other thing that there is, Marilyn, is people, retrofit coordinators. So you can take a whole house approach and get a report done that looks at everything you can do in your house in the order that you should do it. So I don't know what the one local to you would be, but if you Google retrofit coordinator, then hopefully there'll be an organisation that covers your area, and that's just a way to do things that make sense for in a whole house approach rather than a sort of piecemeal approach of changing your heating, for example. Ken, you're on mute. Ken.
Yeah, I do feel sorry for people, because it's an absolute minefield, all of this. It's very complicated. And who do you go to? If you go to professionals, of course, they are likely to charge you, understandably. You know, you should be spending that money on your building, shouldn't you? You need to sort of, there's so much information available now that you can make lots of inquiries on the web, and there are lots of example projects to have a look at. Just do some searching around, look on YouTube. You have to become knowledgeable yourself. Think how the building behaves, how the building works, how energy moves through it, how water moves through it. Don't go for the high-tech solutions. Go for the passive solutions first, and send me emails.
Yeah, I would just second that. Ken is right. If your roof is leaking or your back wall's cracked and you've got water coming in, those are what you're going to spend your money on.
Yeah.
Everything else you wait for later. If you've got a gas boiler and it's still working, then surely you leave it, just keep it going as long as you possibly can. But do all of the things that Ken's saying, like, you know, all the insulation you can possibly afford to do. And the loft is an easy one. And mostly the windows. Several people have been asking about getting their double glazing repaired. And I looked into this, the UPVC, if you inherit UPVC, unglorious, you know, double glazing, you can get it repaired. They don't like, you know, people like to tell you you have to have it all new, but you can. St Leonard's Glass will come and put in new bits for you. So that's a cheaper thing. And Peter's right about the trickle vents. They're very useful, especially in your kitchen and your bathroom. I mean, you know, you've got to have ventilation in your Victorian house too. So think about all these things first before you start thinking about these really, you know, advanced projects and air source heat pumps and all the rest of it.
Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left. I think we may have time for one or two last questions. Alison, Richard, you're waving your hand. Richard, do you want to say something? And then Alison, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
I was just going to say there's a couple of questions I noticed, but I'm probably not seeing the whole chat. One from Anna about water warm walls, which I'd never heard of. And another from, oh yes, I think it was Alison, asking about external wall insulation, which we haven't really covered. And I mean, all I know is that there is a sort of brick fake veneer that you can get for external wall insulation, but goodness me, you need to think hard before you do it on a beautiful older facade. So I just wondered what Peter and Ken and Catherine thought about those two things.
Okay, it depends do we have a description of this house in particular, this person's house, what it is?
Sure, it's me. So it's
right.
it's an old cottage, so it's about circa 1750 or even earlier, solid wall. So it's got a beautiful brick front, but it's been what do you call it, rendered on the other side. So I'm quite happy to do external insulation on 3 of them, but I really don't want to ruin the front because it's so beautiful. But is that just stupid?
Okay.
Because then all the heat's going to come out of the front, and it would have been, because it's very expensive to do.
Okay, so are you a listed building?
No.
Right, okay. But by the way, the council has allowed external wall insulation on listed buildings in the Old Town. I do know that for a fact.
Good. I'm in Hampshire, actually. I'm not in Sussex.
Oh, okay, right. So if it's render,
it's in a conservation area, but
right. But if it's render already, there shouldn't be a problem. You need to find out if it's a hard render or not. Is it a Portland cement based render? But
say again. The type of render.
Is it a hard render, which may be a waterproof, a Portland cement based render? But on the house here, I have put external wall insulation on here,
yeah,
which has an acrylic render on it, and it looks fantastic. I mean, it's over the really awful old brickwork, so you can get that done on 3 walls. You must make sure you've got a good damp-proof course, and you must have a look at the detailing of how this wall insulation finishes at the top. Have you got gable walls, or does it finish under an eaves?
It's under the apex of a slate roof, and there's not very much overhang.
Okay, phone me up or email me, and we'll have a look.
Will do.
Okay, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken.
Okay.
Thanks, Ken. And then we just had one final question from Anna. Would you like to come off mute and ask it?
Underfloor heating with its curly-whirly pipes that have water piped through them at 40 degrees or so. Is it a good idea to, if you don't want to pull up your Victorian floorboards, but you do have walls to plaster, so something's got to be done to the wall anyway, to put these, it does involve a sort of plastic, a bit like bubble wrap, but stiffer, that you wind your pipes around into the wall, and then you plaster over them. Is there anyone who wants to tell me that that's a bad idea?
Am I still on?
Yeah, Ken.
Okay. I can see you've got some very nice coving there in your house. Have you? Have you got some?
This is the room with the nicest. We have lesser coving elsewhere.
Right. So you're talking about pipes, wet pipes in the wall system.
Yes. Yes. Not leaking, but yeah.
Can be done, but you need to insulate the wall, and you're going to lose features like that. Yeah, sure, can be done. Are they rendered? Is that lath and plaster? Probably.
No, I don't think it is lath and plaster. No, and it certainly wouldn't be in this room. It would be in the bathroom specifically. Yeah.
In the bathroom. Well, you're going to have to look. We need a decent conversation here. I think not going to answer it now.
Okay.
Email me and we'll have a chat about it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Richard, I don't know if you want to sort of say a few words as we reach the end.
Yeah, just thanks to everybody who came, and please send us your suggestions as to how we, because this was a bit of an experiment, how we organize these for the future, because there is obviously a big demand, and there's a range of different kinds of issues. What do you do if you have no money and might not get a loan? How can you, get help accessing the grant system? Because there's certainly quite a lot of money out there at the moment. There's never been so much focus on retrofit and grants, especially for inefficient homes or people on low incomes. Then you've got the really technical issues. And I think this is probably something that we should structure around what people want. And I think what Catherine suggested, not so much a blacklist, but a kind of also recommendations. I think we've started to engage local builders, contractors to install boilers when, you know, someone is on a low income and their boiler's broken down for 2 months and they've got disabled children and there's a flood in their kitchen and the drainage is all blocked and no one was doing anything. We got a local builder in Eastbourne to go and sort it all out and put in a £1,200 gas boiler. So I think we see value in identifying who were the really good local builders who will not overcharge, who will do a good job, and to somehow, you know, I have a list of contractors. The trouble is the small, good individual or small companies are just not probably interested in getting that Trustmark certification. So, you know, if we had enough local builders who said, yeah, we'll do it, but could you as an umbrella organization get the Trustmark for us and include us in it, then that may be a way forward. I mean, it just seems crazy to get a grant and then have an insulation company come from Essex or Nottingham to do the work for you.
Catherine, are you?
Yeah, I was just going to add, if anybody wants to come and see the studio and ask more questions about Celotex in the walls and Celotex under floors and how you get your floorboards up, I'm very happy. Just email me or ask Kate or send it to Kate and Kate will send it on to me.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. That does bring us to the end. The panel have kindly agreed to stick around for a few more minutes. So if anyone does have any burning questions that they weren't able to ask, then we will stay here for a little bit. But for everyone else, that's come to the end of the session. So thank you very, very much. You are all welcome to have an energy advice appointment with us, and we can help you put together a plan for your house. And you can do that just by emailing me, and lots of people have asked for the information that we've gone through, so I'll put it all on our website. I'll put the presentations there and I'll put the links there, so don't worry about that. I'll put everything that's in the chat that's useful onto our website and I'll send you all the link. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Ken.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, can I just say something about this, you know, who we use to do this work? I think some of us are going to have to learn to do this ourselves. You know, in my 30s house, because I'm fortunately very practically minded, but in my 1930s house, I did, as I said at the beginning, make a start, do something. I did it on a more like a room by room basis. As you decorate, do something. Some things, like if you're renewing all the services, you obviously can't do, but you know, choose your favorite room or the room that you occupy most and tackle that one first. Okay.
Ken, can I ask you something?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. What's your email address?
Kate will give it out, won't you, Kate, to everyone?
Yeah, I'll go and find it. I'll put it in the chat so everyone's got it now.
Okay.
You might be bombarded, Ken.
That's all right. Don't rush. Yeah, it may take some time.
Okay, anything else? Peter?
I had a suggestion to Ken mainly. I think part of the problem is that if you don't have any training in building or construction or architecture or engineering, a lot of the things we're talking about now is just very complicated to people who don't understand it, because they don't understand the basics. So it might be a good idea. I was struck by some of the things that you said about, you know, the things to address first. You've got to make sure you've got any water coming up in the house, any damp. If you've got any water coming down in the house from the roof, you know, and then if you've got those things sorted out, then you go on to the next thing, which might be, for example, insulation in the loft. perhaps it's a good idea to have a very simple little flow chart on that basis, saying, have you fixed this? have you got the problem with this? Fix that first. Have you got a problem with this? Fix that next, and so on, to give people an understanding about the sequence of the things that are essential.
Catherine?
I'd just like to add that I did find contractors who, if I persisted with them and I gave them really proper drawings and we talked about it and they understood what it was, they did do what I asked eventually, and they did a nice job. I just had some rogues, and I had people who, like Peter was saying, they will tell, and Ken says this too, is that they'll do what's the easiest thing for them, but you have to stick to your guns about what you want and really be clear with them and stand over them while they do it, and just don't pay them all the money until they've done what you want them to do. I mean, it does work in the end, but what I found was that builders knew nothing about insulation.
Yeah.
They were completely unknowing, and they didn't really care about the underfloor, the vents under the floor. And I was a bit obsessed with the ventilation under my flooring, and they didn't really get it. But I had to really be I just had to persist with them. And in the end, if you persist and you're quite nice about it, they will do it. But they won't do it without that, which is a pain.
The problem in the UK is that a lot of builders have no formal qualifications and no formal training, and they've just sort of learnt things as they've gone along, working with their other people, their mates or whatever. So there's some really poor people around. It's like anything else, you know, there's good doctors and there's poor doctors, there's good lawyers and poor lawyers, there's good builders and there's crap builders, and the only way of finding out is either you've got to use them yourself and make a judgment, or ask other people if they've good experiences with somebody. I mean, when I first moved to Hastings, my problem here was I didn't know any of the local builders. Spent a lot of time trying to find out who was good and who was bad, and some of the guys that came that I interviewed were just completely clueless, you know, and they were working as builders in the town. And if I hadn't known what I was talking about, I might have hired them.
I've noticed, Guy, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come off mute and ask a question?
Yeah, I guess this partly relates to the hydrogen boiler thing, but I think maybe what would be useful is, you know, there's been some fantastic kind of things displayed here, you know, stuff. But with all of those particular different things that people have suggested that they did and stuff like this, there's no costings to them. Yeah, so I guess it would be interesting to know, not necessarily now, I don't mean now, but like if you were going to do this again, in fact, how much it costs to do any particular thing. Because, for instance, I mean, one of the things around the hydrogen boiler thing would be that, of course, you might need to kind of look into where you can get grants to do things. But if you haven't got grants to do things and you're on minimal budgets, yes, if you've got a gas boiler that needs replacing and that's essentially all you can do, yes, with the money that you've got, is what would be the best thing to do in terms of, would it be good to replace it with a gas boiler because it might then be able to be translated into hydrogen later on. I'm not asking for the answer for that specific question. It's more generally the notion of what to do given different layers of money to do things. Of course, if you've got as much money as you like or resources, you could do whatever you want to enable your house to be as energy proficient as possible. But if you've got 2,000 quid and that's all you've got, what are you going to do with 2,000 quid? Sorry, that's my question.
It's a really good point, and just sort of recognizing the different budgets that people have. But I think the problem with it is it's just really dependent on the house. So it's hard to sort of give exact order. I don't know if any of the panel have got any thoughts on that. Ken?
I would just say, if your gas boiler is still working, you seem to be very concerned about this gas boiler. If it's still working, leave it alone. Why are you replacing it?
Interestingly, because it could actually increase, it could create a situation where I can rent out my flat because I'll get an EPC score of E rather than F.
What, by changing the boiler?
Absolutely.
Right. Put loads of insulation in. Don't spend £2,000 on a boiler.
I think the answer to that is it depends how you put the insulation in and where. Yes. Anyway, I'm not really concerned about the boiler. I'm just concerned about the ideals of putting things in against actually potentially what people may actually have to spend to do against anything in the house. It's got nothing to do with gas boilers. It might be insulation or whatever.
Right. So do something. Start. Do it. Spend the money you have. And how I did my 30s house was gradually over about 20 years as I had the money. Took me ages, but I did it.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Quite a few people have stuck around.
I have another question. Well, question. It's Tom.
Tom, hi Tom.
Hiya. There's a bit of a sort of pet subject for me at the moment, just the going back to the wall insulation. So sort of two questions. The first one, I know that Ken mentioned the importance of having mass. So I've got 15-inch thick walls, which obviously is a lot of mass, but they're not insulated. They score badly on the EPC. So that's why I'm considering insulating the wall. So is a thick wall bad in that sense? Is probably one question. And then the second question, coming on to sort of what Ed and Pete said around having a logical order, doing the easier things first, or the quick wins. So wall insulation is obviously expensive, but the sequencing seems to feel that it's something you do earlier because it is sort of it impacts subsequent sort of decisions around radiators and electrics and so on. So the wall sort of comes into a logical order of layering. Would you definitely insulate thick walls is probably the first question.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Outside. Where are you?
Well,
are you in a listed building or a conservation area?
Yeah, so it's a conservation area, so the outside wall isn't an option really.
What is the outside wall?
So it's rough stone. So it's like a stone essentially.
Right, you're going to have to send me some pictures or something, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so you think conservation area might be possible still?
Well, we have a funny planning department. They don't like all sorts of things. There's no reason not to do it, but they'll give you a reason.
Okay.
So let's look at the situation where you are. If it's not visible from the public domain, you should not be a problem.
But it's sort of, it is, yeah. Okay.
Well, let's have a look.
Okay.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks.
Okay. Oh, Richard. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Pete, really. So there's a project that's just kicking off in Barkham near Lewes called Community Heat, and it has quite a lot of funding. And Barkham is an off-gas village, so the idea is to for the local distribution network operator, UK Power Networks, to pilot whether they can avoid investing multi-millions into the secondary substation, while at the same time encouraging people to come off their oil or, propane boilers and use electric heating or vehicle to grid, or, there might be a battery. So this is a sort of smart grid solution that tackles heating. I don't think they're doing a district heating scheme. So what's always intrigued me is if you do all you can with your property to make it, you know, thermally efficient, is there going to be an option to have just these very effective radiant heaters that run on electricity? So if you're comparing a gas boiler that say you use 10,000 kilowatt hours a year, costing you 5 pence a kilowatt hour, but electricity is costing you 15 pence. Can you heat a house for 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity if you have the right heaters in the right place? So, you know, what would a radiant wall heater be? 6 kilowatts in a room? Is that enough? Ken, you're on mute.
You're asking one of these how long's a piece of string questions again. If you get the U values low enough, down to passive house standards, you shouldn't need to heat the house at all. Even through the winter, you'll only need energy for your domestic hot water. So, you know, what do you want? Why do we need any heaters?
Okay then, well, I don't think we've got any more questions. Thank you so much to the panel for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Oh, we've got one. Oh, we've got one from Jim. Jim, would you like to come off mute? Jim, okay, well, Jim asked about the boiler.
Okay.
Would like a new boiler. Gas one is 30 years old and is going to break.
How does he know it's going to break? Can he read its mind?
The spare parts. It's working fine, but I've been told spare parts might not be available.
They tell everyone that. My boiler was 40 years old before I replaced it.
Wow.
Keep it going and put the insulation in. But put aside some money to replace it if you really need to.
Yeah. We've got a strong message about insulation coming out. Right. Okay. Well, and on that, let us. Oh, Catherine, are you waving?
No, sorry, I'm saying good night.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you all. Really appreciate all of you coming and really appreciate the panel and all your wisdom on this.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for coming.
Bye. Bye-bye.